How's it going, guys? I'm here with my partner, Fiona. Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. She has a podcast. Basically, this will be uploaded onto her podcast, and then I'll hopefully take a few clips for my YouTube channel. But what we're going to do today is talk about concussions in sports and why it's a big issue that is getting a lot more attention, particularly in the media and the research realm, but and the literature. But we essentially still have so much to know about it. I've gone through my own dealings with concussion and mild traumatic brain injury through bike crashes in road cycling in some years back now. But we want to bring some attention to the matter, talk a little bit about the science and why it's definitely something that anyone playing sports, but also in general everyday life, really needs to know about.
Yeah, so we'll start off with some stats. I think, where we're from down in Melbourne, one of the biggest sports is AFL. So got some stats from there, and in September 2021, it was revealed that concussion was the top cause of hospitalizations within community AFL. So we're not even just talking elite or professional, community footy since 2013. So the top, which is huge. You think about things like broken fingers and other little injuries or big injuries you can have playing footy, which is a contact sport. Concussion was the top, with more than 2 in 3 of all concussions in the sport being sustained by young footballers between the ages of 10 and 19 years old. So 2 in 3 of those concussions were in the youth.
And I think that's one thing that is very important to draw attention to as well, because obviously any form of concussion can be pathological and cause both acute and long-term implications for the person that suffers it. But remember as well, I think that teens particularly, this is an age group that are so, they really are in their formative years, and their brain is so malleable and influenced by many factors. They're going through puberty even during that time. There's so many changes occurring in the brain that are so important for basically the rest of their lives. And so you add a brain injury on top of that, and you really do complicate, I guess, the development of that person, or potentially could, impact the development of that person substantially, even if it's in what we call mild.
Yeah, and you say brain injury, and in my head, before this research, I was like, oh, concussion isn't a brain injury. It's just a little knock to the head. You might be knocked out in my formative opinion, which isn't actually true. So I've got the definition from Brain Injury Australia, and they define concussion as a traumatic brain injury induced by biomechanical forces, such as a direct blow to the head, face, neck, or elsewhere on the body with an impulsive force transmitted to the head. So that's, really interesting, is it's not even a knock to the head that you need to have to gain a concussion.
Yeah, that's probably the most predominant cause of many concussions, but any kind of force which essentially rattles the brain within the skull is enough to definitely cause a concussion, for sure.
The reason why I've got you here with me is because you're a med student, so second year medicine, but also you've had a concussion yourself. So you've got a little bit of clinical understanding of the literature in terms of you can understand the words better than someone like me can, but also you've got the lived experience. So can you talk us through what it is and what's a traumatic brain injury in general, concussion's just a form of it, and the different severities and everything like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think just to preface that as well, and you mentioned that I'd suffered a concussion. I think I probably suffered a few concussions throughout. I used to do a lot of road cycling, racing on the road, and any kind of bike. I've had a lot of crashes. Well, a few crashes, a few significant ones. Don't laugh.
Yeah, a lot.
Maybe one of them was my fault.
Yeah.
The worst one. After those crashes, I've literally broken helmets into 2 pieces and didn't necessarily lose consciousness, but that's of course going to be a pretty decent concussion nonetheless. Just at the time, we'd never really considered it to be all that bad. And then of course my more, I guess you'd say, severe concussion, where I probably lost complete consciousness for 5 to 10 minutes in the realm of that time frame. was, of course, where a lot of, my lived experience with mild traumatic brain injury comes from, right? But I think going back to the criteria and definition of what a concussion is and traumatic brain injury and the different types, I think it's important to recognize that any form of, like what you said, traumatic brain injury sounds, as the name suggests, quite severe, but there are different forms. So we have a mild, moderate, and severe form of traumatic brain injury. Most concussions will fall under the realm of a mild traumatic brain injury. We use, essentially, to measure the severity of traumatic brain injury, we use a few different criteria. One's the Glasgow-Coma scale. This essentially measures three main, focal points of responsiveness, and that's the eye or the ocular movements, the verbal or oral response to stimuli, and then the motor or what's called the motoric response, right? With the Glasgow-Coma scale, we might even link this in the notes for anyone who wants to have a look for themselves. Essentially, the higher the score you get for each of the three different criteria, the less severe your concussion is, or your traumatic brain injury, I should say, is suspected to be. So essentially, as the score increases, you have more improved responses, whether that's being able to open your eyes without being prompted, whether that's being able to have a conversation or being able to move your body as prompted by someone saying, do this or do that. The lower scores are like, for example, you can't open your eyes, you can't make any sounds, even when, prompted. And you literally will not make movements. And that's that would be a 1 for each criteria. So then when you add them up, essentially the higher scores, technically it would be 13 to 15 is a mild, and then 9 to 12 is moderate, and then between 3 is the lowest score you can get, 3 and 8 would be classified as severe. And there is some, room for, it's not always as straight cut. You might have a Glasgow-Coma scale of a particular number, but then have lost consciousness for more than a particular time. So there's a bit of nuance to it. But essentially, we measure the Glasgow-Coma scale. We also look at what's called post-traumatic amnesia. And this is how long is your loss of memory, right? Either from the whole day or the actual event itself, or in and around the event. So less than a day this is after long term, if you can't remember, if you can't remember just less than one day,
that 24 hours,
then that's considered mild. 1 day to 7 days is considered moderate, and then more than 7 days is severe. And then we have loss of consciousness in and of itself. 0 to 30 minutes being mild, 30 minutes to 1 day or 24 hours being moderate, and then more than 24 hours being severe. And remember as well, 0 with mild traumatic brain injury, 0 is still a legitimate number, right?
Yeah, so you don't actually have to be knocked out to have a traumatic brain injury.
100%. So to have a mild traumatic brain injury, you don't necessarily need to lose consciousness. And this is where it's quite nuanced and where people, can have somewhat of a misconception about what is classified as a traumatic brain injury and what's not, or even what's classified as a concussion. We know that concussion, of course, is a mild traumatic brain injury, but we don't need to lose consciousness. Definitely can, but it's not a prerequisite. So any form of head knock which causes the symptoms of concussion, so the delayed response, confusion, and all those kinds of things, definitely is a mild traumatic brain injury.
So in the relation to sporting context, bring it back to the sporting realm, the footy players or the cyclists or, ice hockey, I'm just naming a few, could happen in any sport really. They've had a bit of a knock to the head, I don't know if there's a tackle or they fell over, they don't actually have to lose consciousness.
100%. 100%. And this is where, again, we have this misconception that, you haven't suffered a concussion. And again, it's changing. We're there's a lot more research coming out, a lot more understanding in the community in general, and even in the local sporting clubs, it's kind of trickling down. The importance of this is becoming increasingly recognized.
Yeah.
But yeah, remember, you don't necessarily need to be knocked out to have a concussion, which of course is very important to realize.
Yeah.